Were there any memorable turning points in your time teaching women's and gender studies courses here? I kept that vague, so I guess.
Yeah. So I guess I could say a couple things. When I started at, and I say women's studies generically, so I understand we've changed our name, it's just we use the old, or I use the old term. So I started in women's studies at Livingston, having myself just recently finished my degree. So yeah, I was older than the undergraduates, but not that much older, right? And I come out of a socialist feminist collective in Ithaca, New York, where I'd done my work and was used to working with students and faculty in this collective. It was a study group, it was an activist group. So I was very comfortable with and accustomed to blurring the boundaries between practice and what goes on in terms of knowledge production in the classroom, and believed in it. So, I'm thinking, for example, of Linda Gordon's article that appears in a very early issue of Science about the feminist movement as being the political arm of women's studies, and put that into practice in my teaching. So work that I had done as an activist infused my teaching. And yet I came into the university having had a year of prior teaching at a smaller college, and understood quickly this was not Antioch College, that there were, multiple audiences and multiple levels of administration, and somehow for women's studies to continue to thrive, I, as the chair, had to somehow figure out a way to do both. And I'll tell you an anecdote if you want. At the time at Livingston College, the Intro to Women's Studies course, which at that time was called Women in American Culture, although already it tried to be more, we didn't use the word transnational, but it tried to be more international, global, and focused, tried to discourage men from registering. So it would be a women-only space. That had been the practice before I got here. I was told about this very clearly by the students, and yet, I was not necessarily dedicated to keeping that a women-only space. Yet, the tradition of that course was that once a semester, the men who were in the class, and there were always some men, there were men who declared themselves to be feminists, there were men who wanted to take the course for any number of reasons. There were always men in the course, but they were asked to leave because it was a day of pelvic self-exams. And when I came into my office at Livingston for the first time, I found 2 cartons of plastic specula in the office, and that is how I learned about this tradition in the course. So yes, times have changed. The dean at that moment of Livingston College, Bob Jenkins, called me in one day and said, I don't know how you're going to do this, but you cannot have a women-only space in a classroom at a public university with state funds. I understand what you're dealing with, but somehow you got to figure out how to change it. And we did gradually, through meetings with students and, and putting, some of what had been activist practices in a space that was outside the classroom. Women's coalitions, women's groups, it morphed. I got so into telling the anecdote.
I loved it.
I'm trying to think what else I could say. The whole field has changed, right? The field has become immensely more complex, and I would say, again, appropriately so. It has influenced my teaching in sociology, and in ways that I am very expansive as a disciplinary scholar. Sometimes, I think twice whether I can include, a particular feminist text in something I'm teaching that's not necessarily related to gender, and I do because I think it's oftentimes the best scholarship available. So I'm just now teaching a course on immigration and citizenship, which we know, of course, is, you know, inflected through and by gender, but, you know, it's not a women's studies course per se. And yet, you know, some of my, you know, gender, feminist, women's studies texts made their way into that class, you know.